I'm Scott Wright, CEO of ClickArmor and creator of the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. And we have our regular panelists, AJ, Leece, and Fletus, Poston. Tyler Sweeney is away still. He had COVID recently, so he's just recovering. So hopefully we'll have Tyler back next time. But really want to thank everybody for joining us. And right now, I'd just like to ask people if you could say hi and tell us where you're coming in from in the chat. I think Fletus is in Eastern US, right?
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina. And we have AJ is from Calgary, right? All right.
Yeah. We have out west in Canada.
Virginia, Toronto.
Ottawa.
Yeah. Awesome. And so while people are doing their greetings and posting any welcome comments, I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping things. So we did last time a sort of a fun process where we did polling, and I didn't do it perfectly. It wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to be, but I'd like to try it again because I think we actually got some good information out of the last set of polls we did, and I will try and do it a little more efficiently this time. So we're using a tool called Poll Everywhere, and what you can do to join our polls is go to either the Poll Everywhere app if you happen to have it. You don't have to have the app, but you can just go to pollev.com/ScottW833. That's my free account. We're not spending money on this yet, but it helps us. I think we can have up to 50 people responding for free, so we may as well use that. And so what you'll see is in each time I activate a poll, after you've put your whatever user ID you want to use, it can be anonymous, or you can just use a first name if you like. And when I activate a poll question, you'll see a bunch of options. I'm going to do a similar thing to last time where we had a ranking system. I think it provides us with some really good data especially when we've got quite a few people responding. So it will just allow you to move some choices up and down so you can prioritize things as you see what they should be. And while we're doing it this time, I'm going to actually share my screen so you can see the results in real time. I didn't do that last time and it was kind of awkward for me, but I think I have a way I can just share it from a browser window. So we'll try and do that. And so that's the polling, and I think that's going to be a key part of what we're doing. So any questions before we get started? I think either Fletus or AJ, if you have any sort of opening remarks. What we wanted to cover today, really, I kind of forgot to mention that, was the theme of today's session. While it's not formal, we do want to try to address a few questions that sort of came up over the last few weeks, and that is, what are the types of awareness that we need to be able to put into place with respect to the organization? And from that, I'm thinking there are two real types. One is, are people aware that they are vulnerable and can be targeted, versus are they aware of what to do about it when they actually realize they are vulnerable? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And AJ or Fletus, do you have any sort of thoughts on the whole process we're doing here?
That looks good.
I'm just looking forward to the dialogue.
All right, cool. So we're seeing the results of the Poll Everywhere poll. I think we'll give people a little bit of a chance to get in and have a look at it. But I just want to go through what we mean by these options. So what are the most important top priorities for recognizing importance? So these are the things that I think we need to actually be able to do to let people know that it is important for them to learn about different kinds of threats and how to spot them. So do we use things like information about how the organization is being targeted? Can you find historical evidence, or can you find related industry stories, for example, that are maybe less direct, maybe less sensitive? And sometimes people can realize that, if other businesses in our industry are being targeted, so can we. And there's other types of information that we can present to people to get them on our side, realizing that they have to take awareness training. So, how are individuals being targeted within our organization? Is that information too sensitive to share, or how do we make it so that people can realize that we are actually being targeted individually? Other ways to look at it would be, do we want to tell people about the impacts of ransomware and malware? People tend to know that it's out there, but is it actually something that would cause us a lot of damage? Same thing with fraud risks. And we can even look at accidental exposures or insider threats. So we're starting to get some data. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but we're looking at right now, kind of the top response is stories of targeting of individuals. So typically that would be within the organization, but you can certainly find news stories where there is enough detail to realize how somebody was targeted with phishing or social engineering. Fletus, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we just saw an article posted, and I think I shared it out, where the last couple instances they've been targeting family members, not just the employees. So I think there was a phishing wave that went out through an SMS that impacted a company just this week. And then there was another one where a phishing attempt also was going after the family member. So going through the least resistance versus going through a company's security stack and their awareness training, they were targeting their spouse and kids. So
that's cool. Yeah. AJ?
Yeah, same idea. I think when you talk about targeting individuals, I think within a business, you have to distill it down to maybe more of the role that those people play rather than, so-and-so very specifically by name. Because if you kind of point it to a specific name, then it sort of becomes this diffusion of responsibility. But if it's, hey, you in the finance department or you in the HR department, this is the type of ways that attackers can, try to mess with you, or this is the way that your job allows attackers to try and infiltrate the organization. Those then tend to become a little bit more, okay, I see myself in that screen. So that's the big piece I would say when it comes to any awareness training is if you want to distill it down to the different type of impact for the role specifically.
And just to add a little more to that too, when you disclose your role in social media platforms such as LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, it makes you more of a target as well. Because if I'm looking for, let's just say, plant information, I may go after an operator of a plant. If I'm looking to do a BEC, I may go after a controller of a company or a finance person. So depending on the type of attack, I may do recon against your social platform, aka LinkedIn, where most of your titles are at, or if you share a lot about your specific role in Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, it may make you more of a target as well from an individual point of view.
It's really
interesting. I think that really dovetails into that impacts of accidental exposures, right? Because just because you didn't release any specific data about Project XYZ, by putting that information somewhere publicly, or even, the good old fashioned, here's a picture of my new badge at the new place kind of deal, right? So those all really come together, and then to demonstrate those relative to the role again and align it to the information that you safeguard, that goes a long way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm actually kind of surprised, and it's kind of nice though to see that impacts of accidental exposures is right up there as number 2. I kind of thought it might be one of the other items, but that is a really good point. People realizing that it's not so much somebody being, targeted in such a way that they can't really do anything about it. It's something that they chose to do that exposed the organization.
Yeah, and then looking at 3, I think people, when they think insider threats, they tend to think that 1%, that one person who's malicious versus insider management or risk management side of it versus the insider threat, because it only takes one person to accidentally disclose something. So an autocomplete in an email sends it to an external person, or you are on your personal account when you're trying to be in your company box, you upload it to your personal box account instead of your company's box or Dropbox account.
Yeah.
Stuff like that tends to be the incidental or accidental exposures.
Kind of brings to mind something in the news recently regarding a lawsuit where somebody sent all the data from from one side to the other by accident, was it? What was that story? I can't remember now.
It was the Alex Jones trial.
Oh, the Alex Jones
trial. His lawyer sent the entire digital copy of the phone to the opposing counsel. That's in the very strong category of accidental disclosure. Absolutely.
I mean, and they build on each other too. If you think about like the fact that if you do a targeting individual, the malware may come in, or the accidental exposure, you're now opening your company up. So targeting your organization and or ransomware or an incident, because as a security operations professional, that's when we see the issues, is when someone's disclosed something, aka a CVE for your application. Now, after Patch Tuesday, you have Exploit Wednesday.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So that's cool. I just want to give people any opportunity if they didn't see something that they thought should be on this list. I couldn't be exhaustive, but I would love to hear if anybody has any other ideas of information that you can share with people that will help them realize the importance of taking security awareness. One thing that I thought of, and this is actually, oh, we've got a comment from Jennifer. Stories of targeting and impact are critical to make it real, but you also need examples and maybe rewards for identifying fishes. So yeah, this is kind of a feedback loop, right? Of trying to give people a state of the union as you're going along. Partway through your program, you can provide that feedback to people and say, hey, this is how we're doing, right? Or here's something that came up. I was also thinking of the fact that executives themselves sometimes need that extra push, and what can we do to try and get them to be aware of how much of a need there is. And I know there have been studies I've seen, I can't remember when the latest one was, but I've seen multiple ones where, you know, they'll survey the executive suite and then they'll survey the director of IT, and they get two different views on how secure they are or what their issues are. And it isn't always security awareness, but it's an awareness within the executive level that there's a gap or a lack of awareness, that the IT team is really concerned about stuff where the executives kind of feel we've got it already covered. Has anybody seen that or used that kind of information to try and inform executives of the gap in their potential security?
Yeah,
I think you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Fletus.
I was going to say a lot of that comes down to intel sharing. Your executive sees it when it hits the Wall Street. Your operations center has seen it through their internal processes. So we as an ops team may have processed that intel on Monday. It comes out on Friday in the Wall Street. So now you're having to backdate the fire that may be because your leadership team didn't see the intel report that you pushed north from the internal processing. They only saw the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. So just helping close that loop and finding avenues to make sure those reports are being pushed up. So when they do read the article, they know the countermeasures that's already been implemented, or that at least your SOC and your awareness team are aware of the threat and have already decided if they're going to push a Slack message, a Yammer message, a corporate email, or something out to the audience to make them aware of a smishing attack or a phishing attack, et cetera. So,
yeah, there's sort of two aspects to that. One's the operational part, as you said, in real time, things happening, and the other is a strategic thing to let them know, you know, we are likely at risk, or should we do a kind of assessment and figure out if we're at risk. AJ, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think it really dovetails into what you want out of your security awareness program. What are the main outcomes that you want to get? Because you mentioned, you know, you can ask these two different audiences, and one will say, yeah, we're really secure, and others will go, we certainly have problems. But it's not that they're both right or wrong. It's that from their lens, that's what they're seeing. So the security program goals really do factor into kind of how that question gets answered, because your director of IT might see all kinds of technology holes, and further up in the C-suite, they go, no reputational risk, otherwise we're not interested, kind of thing. So it really does vary based off of each part of the business's desired outcomes from those goals. And then I think when it comes to tailoring your awareness training to that, it just becomes an understanding of the audience and what that behavior is that you're trying to change in line with those program goals, so that everybody's kind of paying attention at the same layer.
Yeah, really, really good thoughts. Another angle that I thought of as well that came up kind of recently, I think maybe even this week in a interaction that I had on LinkedIn with somebody, they actually kind of took issue with the idea that, you know, we have any evidence that awareness is a problem, and maybe a naive approach, or maybe just someone who wants to see the data. And I had trouble pointing to the data, and that's usually because the whole return on security investment, right? You can't show that an investment in security is paying off in any particular way. And so it is a question about the data. Do we have any data that we can share that will prove to executives that we are vulnerable, or that we may be doing well, but it doesn't mean we should be cutting back, you know, just because you haven't seen any incidents in the last little while.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in a previous, Scott, or at least it might have been a dialogue between us as the panelists. You're like, one of my former executives said he knew it was a good day when he didn't hear from security. He means we were doing our job correctly. That means if you hear nothing, that means we're doing our job correctly, and he's not getting a call from a 3-letter agency. The other thing too, we can put metrics together. Like I can say how many blocks a firewall does, but that just means I'm stopping recon. That's not really a valuable metric, but people try to push. I blocked X amount of attacks today, mainly just because someone was scanning your public facing website. And you got to just control your story. So understanding that we may not have seen a virus because we've spent money to stop the attack before it even hit the endpoint, or we may not have seen the fish because it was dropped at the edge or by the mail appliance, the mail transfer agent, or a sandboxing technology, and then being able to pull those metrics out. But then you have to trend them over time to say it's not a point in time block. It's we've seen this over the last 7 days, 30 days, 90 days, and trend it out and say, this is where your investment's saving you money. Because we know that one attack can be millions of dollars, and you're likely not spending millions of dollars for each control, but you're saving millions of dollars by trending over time. This is the amount of phishing emails, DECs that you've stopped, and or ransomware attacks where someone tried to do an ACI change that would have downloaded something, or ACH change. So
yeah. And I think there's a lot, this goes more to just general communication processes and messaging than necessarily security awareness training itself. There's a spectrum, right, of messaging we want to get to people that are, in need of understanding that change or that kind of action required. AJ, any last thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's sort again, it goes back to baselining. You sort of, if you're putting in program changes, you have to really baseline where you're at. So what are my click-throughs on malicious emails from different departments? How many of these attachments are skating past my email gateway? And once you have that, and then you put in some of the changes, that delta now becomes a pretty measurable outcome that you can present. And so then it becomes, this was the investment of, technology, tooling, process, et cetera. This is the initial baseline behavior we had. After we implemented it, this was the change that went through. So there's definitely a lot of measurement that can be done, but you have to really set up the environment in order for that measurement to become useful. Otherwise, you're just kind of baselining a whole lot of stuff that you don't really understand, or you might put something in and maybe it works. Or maybe you buy a new tool and it becomes shelfware, which is supremely common. So there's a lot of opportunities, but you have to kind of do the legwork first of figuring out what you know within the business and how bad it's become. One of the main metrics, I think, if I had to pick one and only one metric, it would be a way to measure capacity to respond, right, with regards to incident response. And that sort of, I guess, extends far away from awareness training because those two are kind of very, very different. But when you measure that capacity to respond and you evaluate that regularly within a business, that's really where all of your security program coalesces, is how well equipped your teams are to handle an incident should it arise. So if I had to pick one and only one metric, that would be it.
And just to add to that a little bit, like the mean time to resolution or the time between events is helpful, but the awareness team can share that, especially as they're building their metrics to get to your board and to your C-level. I know your poll says here about sharing those with internal customers, like you're sharing with your employees. You have to be strategic about when you tell your employees that we've been attacked, or we've been under attack, or we've been threatened, because those words mean different things to different people in the org. Like you don't say breach to certain people, you don't say attack to certain businesses, just because the commonality of the language doesn't mean the same thing when you leave your SOC, or when you leave your awareness org, or when you leave your board meeting. Different audiences hear different terminology, different. So going to AJ's point, you have to put metrics under development for an extended period of time before you actually share them. Because if a metric for 30, 60 days may not be viable, but if it's been there for a year, it may mean and hold more weight when you take it to your C-level or to your board members to justify the cost basis of using your personnel, your tools, your MSP, or any other provider that you're licensing and using in your organization.
Right. Cool. So I think we could actually go ahead to the next question, which I just activated. So it's around, how do you rank these sources and methods for being useful with respect to finding that information or being able to identify the gaps? So we've got networking with security colleagues, speaking with employees one-to-one, external sources like databreaches.net, which has constant stream of stories, and other things like internal incident histories. So we've got pretty even distribution right now. I'm not sure how many people have actually put it in, but it's changing on a minute-by-minute basis. So we're just going to give people another minute or two. But basically, some of this stuff we just sort of touched on briefly. But I think I typically, from an ease of identification perspective, I like using databreaches.net. I'm not inside an organization. So when I'm helping organizations say, how do we get this stuff across? We do reach out to people internally and those incident data sources. But I also look for stuff that is, industry relatable so that they can realize that other organizations are actually getting hit with the same things. And speaking with employees one-to-one, I think we were just sort of talking about that as well. But with respect to things you might hear through the grapevine that you may not have thought of, right? And you can anonymize those stories and use those as well. Any other thoughts on this kind of approach, in terms of ranking those important sources?
Yeah, I was just going to say, be careful with the internal histories and other things. Just make sure you're changing the names to protect the innocent. And, it's really valuable for an organization to learn from its own history. I think that's one of the best things you could do, especially when you put together awareness training and discussions about what the security program needs to do. But yeah, you also have to be pretty careful not to divulge too much information, because that might have been a particularly sensitive incident, or it might be particularly embarrassing for the organization. So yeah, I would say those are really valuable, but definitely make sure that you're anonymizing it. And if you have a legal department, maybe let them take a look at the story before you go ahead and publish it.
I would say, yeah, for sure. I mean, every organization I've worked with pretty much has a few juicy stories, and they're always, the IT security team is always very sensitive to the fact that we can't be sharing this raw information or names or anything like that. But often they will say we can't even allude to the fact that we might have had that kind of incident, right? So we just have to point out to people that other businesses have had this kind of incident, or we're worried that this could happen. So we kind of word things carefully. But it's still as a source for guiding us on what kinds of messages we could be giving. These are things. Does anybody have any other sources that they like as well for that sort of prioritization of the stories and things like that?
I mean, I have a laundry list of sources that I check out pretty much daily. We have an RSS feed into a Slack channel that pretty much just throws data at us all day long that we can read being published on keywords, key terms. I have personal feeds the same way in my LinkedIn and Twitter space that I get intel the same way. And to AJ's point, like internal incidents pretty much should never be shared except for with your management team. Like you're as an awareness person, I would be very cautious unless you're going to, as I said, anonymize. We're seeing this type of phishing attack. We're seeing this type of social engineering targeting us and our sister organizations or peer organizations, not the actual validity.
So exactly. So regardless of which way you choose, if you're going to be using those kinds of stories, you should be clearing them with executives and with the risk management team, if you have one, to help assess any potential risks or damage that could be apparent from talking about those things. So
and the other thing too is if you do share it internally, that they know that it's confidential. So that's data classification. Those things don't leave the four walls of your organization. You're privy to this because you're an employee. That's the only reason the public shouldn't hear about this. The press shouldn't hear about this. This doesn't get shared publicly on a social media site. That's where I think a lot of accidental, going back to our previous poll questions, is someone accidentally shared that IR report or that pen test finding to an external resource who now took it wide. And if you're a publicly traded company, now your stock may be hit, or your executives may be under fire for not divulging it to your customers, et cetera. So, and then just speaking with your one-on-one employees, they see something. They always see things. They know the process. They may be circumventing your controls, and you may want to know that so that you can share, here's how we don't, and here's why we don't. Like a good example of someone who commented earlier on one of your posts, you tell them why it's inappropriate to download a piece of software from the web with the IT focus. Now you've changed the image. Now you made it much harder for someone to manage your device, not really the security risk of it, but just saying by you circumventing our supply chain and our procurement and downloading this, you've now added more risk to me supporting you as a end user and as a an employee, not just
Yeah.
the risk of downloading the software. So helping teach them both the complication of your image on your workstation and or the security risk of transferring a piece of software from the web down to your PC. So
Excellent. Good. So yeah, in the final result, we've got networking with other security colleagues as probably the highest rank method for obtaining useful stories that can be used in this manner. So that's great. Thanks, folks. We'll do one more poll if I can get to that item and activate it. So this one is around ranking the skills that employees need to improve through security awareness. So let's assume now that we've done a good job of understanding what it is that people need to know in order to buy into the program. And now we have them, we're able to educate them. What are the things that are the skills that we need them to be able to improve most? So, you know, in our previous sessions, we actually talked about content areas that people ranked highly, and phishing and social engineering were at the top. And so we're going to just drill into that a little bit and say, within those areas, what are the things that we think we need people to better understand? So it's number one right now is recognition of unusual requests. And I think that's really important because we can tell people, watch out for suspicious stuff, but what does that mean, right? So we have to be able to educate them on those things. I'll let you guys sort of comment on these particular types of skills.
Yeah, I just really book on that recognition of unusual requests. That right there, I think if there's only one piece that we had to pick, that would be the best one. No, the CEO isn't going to reach out to the head of marketing to initiate a wire transfer. That's not really how that pathway works, right? Yeah. So those things should not be responded to with absolutely, where can I send you millions of dollars, right? So yeah, I think the emotional triggers piece, like those two really go hand in hand. Because overall, the initial ingress is certainly, manipulating the human element and making it so that they have convinced you either, by enticing you or frightening you into doing something malicious on their behalf. So yeah, putting those two at the very top and then showcasing that, hey, it's okay. Everybody is going to get conned with this at some point. We've all been there where it's just, oh man, that was a bad link. That we've all been through that, right? So it just becomes another tool in a major toolbox, but at least demonstrating that this is why this is malicious, or this is why they're trying to take advantage of you, and kind of like being reassuring is, and if you fall for it, like it's okay, these things happen. And that sort of goes back to a defense in depth strategy with your security program, not hinging all of it on the awareness, but having all your technical controls lined up so that if those things do happen, we have some support elsewhere.
Yeah, I would just continue to add on to that. Like an unusual request usually triggers emotion. So if I'm not used to seeing a request from a C-level, that's probably unusual. I should stop and assess. If I'm not used to seeing a communication from a Gmail account asking me to do something, I'm going to stop and assess, because usually an internal email should send me a request for work, especially if it's financial based. And then recon. We don't talk about recon enough. Those are generally just an email sent to someone just saying hi. They really just want to know if your email is valid. So don't respond to them. I'm surprised it's as low as it is, but I think people just don't understand the reconnaissance piece. Like sometimes they just want to see if a valid email.
Sometimes they, like you said, they don't look unusual, right? They can be very
recons can be very. It can look like mass marketing. It could look like a vendor who just sent you a request. Hey, I saw you went to a conference. I would love to link up with you. And there's no link, there's no attachment. And all they're looking for is just for you to respond. Now they know this is a valid email address. Now I can try to actually phish you. Now I can try to social engineer you. Now I can try to pull the emotional strings of, hey, you need to do this now because you're making your company vulnerable if you don't. So.
Yeah. And it can happen on social engineering, like through phone calls too, right? I mean, one of the most common things is you pick up the phone and there's dead air. And there's a couple of reasons that can happen. It could be just a calling queue from a cold calling sweatshop, but it could also be a scanner that's looking for active numbers that they can target, right? Another one that I saw, and I actually had a chat with people both online and offline this past couple of weeks, was, identifying phishing links, how to tell people whether, or what ways they can analyze links. And I got tripped up because of the new Microsoft Office Advanced Threat Protection, where it rewrites URLs and has the URL always as, cdnprotection.outlook.com. And thanks, Fletus. I think you're the one that pointed out that can actually be configured so that it doesn't show that, because it can be very confusing to see that rewritten link. And I think where I was testing it out, you actually got the real raw link near the cursor, and that rewritten link shows up at the bottom, but it shows up first, like a few seconds before the other one pops up, depending on if you're accessing it via the web on a slow link or whatever. And the first thing you see change is the bottom link, and you look at it and you say, well, it's the same as every other one. So I thought, that's going to be confusing to people, because first of all, it's always the same Microsoft link, and how do I know whether that's safe or not? And then if I know, though, that another link is coming up, then I have to make sure I'm looking for that right link.
Yeah, the other thing that we're running into is the popularity of URL shorteners. So using Bitly, using AWS short links too. So I'm going to push you to a document that's stored in an S3 bucket. That's a non-human readable URL, because it doesn't even look like something that you would type, because it's generated based on the GUI or the name that you put into the bucket. It generates a URL to direct you directly to it. So an example of that would be the QR codes that we started using during COVID to pull up a restaurant's menu.
Yeah.
The URL behind that QR code is an S3 object to look at the menu. It's not taking you to joespizzashop.com menu.pdf. It's taking you to an S3 bucket to show that Joe's Pizza menu to you. So that's been confusing for a lot of people to realize when they use QR codes or Bitly or other URL shorteners. How do you test that? Is that common? That goes back to the unusual request. Does my CEO or does my security team usually send shorteners? Do they qualify their URLs, or do they not qualify their URLs? And if you can get away from sending URLs and say, hey, go to the corporate portal and access it from here, you can also teach your employees that I don't send you links for internal requests. I send you how to go find it internally via a location in Slack or your
published
portal
locations, or
like this is where you would find this. And if you have any questions, here's how you go about asking us where it is, versus me directing you directly to an external link or an internal link, to be honest.
AJ?
Yeah, I was just going to say the URL shorteners have definitely made that a lot easier from an attacker standpoint, because it looks legitimate, and you can see the expanded one. But again, same idea. If you're sending over even just a specific marketing link to join something like a webinar, those have very long-winded links with tokens in them that you can't process. And I mean, the difference between those two really just boils down to intent. The registration for a webinar versus the registration to have your credentials stolen, those are the two forms that look identical, right? So when you run them through all the technical controls, they show up as malicious because it's asking for some of the data. So it really boils down to context. So then the awareness training needs to get to the heart of, okay, this is the information that you might be submitting for some of these. If they're asking for first name, last name, and email address, I mean, those are sort of public information already if you're online and somewhat connected to the organization. But if they start asking for like usernames, credentials, anything like that, that's the kind of things that get flagged. And just being sure to mention that, no, we haven't partnered with any external entities to take your credentials and save you the sign-on hassle. Like that should all just be configured in the back end if you're using any sort of additional connections that way. So yeah, I think the recognizing the links is going to be a lot more difficult in the future, because you can create these shorteners that they're trivial to do, and you can send them along. Some organizations, I think, have gone so far as to disallow shortened URLs inside of emails. And if you can catch those, great. That's an excellent way to go about it. But yeah, keeping it easy to spot is going to get really difficult.
Yeah. And what makes it even harder is the more outsourced services we use that use those long tokens and legitimately, right? And, we need you to go to QuickBooks to actually see this invoice, or we need you to go to Salesforce or whatever, right? And so it does get hard to teach people how to analyze a long, complex link.
Yeah, the other thing there too, that's going to be more and more prevalent as we use software as a service, so your externally facing applications, is if your organization is using single sign-on or SAML connections, share that with your user. Like, you should not be prompted to put a username and password in for this application. We're handling that through a single sign-on application such as Okta or another an internet ID provider, and teach them this is our ID provider. We're an Okta shop, we're a Microsoft shop. And so they know that if they see the difference, so if you're an Okta and I'm showing you Microsoft, that's unusual. I should be trying to see a Microsoft login page. I'm not a Microsoft shop. Or on the flip side, I'm not an Okta shop. Why are you giving me an Okta page or what looks like an Okta page to do single sign-on? Or so teach your employees that, like, and work with your application teams to set up single sign-on. Like, I know that there's risk and there's pros and cons to that, but then you don't have to worry about your users having to use local auth, like typing a username and password, because then they have to reuse them, or they will reuse them. Not that they have to, they will reuse those passwords across sites. And now you've opened up risk of a password dump happening, and now you've got password spraying happening because of a breach. So
great. Yeah, really good input, guys. And so just to sort of wrap up, I thought I was thinking ahead and trying to decide, so what can we do to make it sort of even more fun and interactive, show people some new stuff. I actually created a short challenge within our ClickArmor platform that sort of illustrates what we're talking about. And so it's a few step sort of process, looking at how, we can explain to executives or managers this problem of getting people actually to buy in before we actually try to teach them. And so, we've got Judy Jenkins, our risk management person, or our CEO, depending on what scenario you're in, at Teleposix. And she's saying, if you were an employee and were told to be suspicious of phishing emails, you might not be clear on what that really means. And so I'm going to say, for example, you might have questions that pop into your head, like, why do I need to be aware of suspicious phishing messages, or how should I know what makes a suspicious message? And so the first option is really just an exploration feature that we have that just sort of lets you go in and explain to people, a certain scenario and what it might mean for you. How do you understand the potential threat to the organization? And if you want to explore the other one, you can go back and look at it and say, now that you understand the importance, we can teach you some basic things about spotting potential threats, like the sender information in an email address, or the links, or the body content. And then once you're finished that, we get a little bit of summary that says, most IT managers and security managers know better than most people why it's important to be aware of suspicious emails. And it's their job to actually inform employees that the organization is being targeted, and to make sure that everybody knows how to spot potentially dangerous messages. And so we throw in another little quiz, right? This is another way that we engage people, so we'll do a little wrap up based on this whole session today. Which of these help employees recognize the need to learn good cyber hygiene? So we've got three choices here: relevant news stories about industry incidents, statistics on the proportion of cyber attacks involving phishing, and explaining the definitions of viruses, worms, and ransomware. So, AJ, if you were going to answer this, which things would you check off here?
News stories. News stories and only news stories. Definitions and stats, those are good, but it's a way to kind of get, people are going to start to gloss over. If they find that work interesting, they'll either go looking for it themselves, or they'll already have that knowledge, or they'll consume it some other way. But by presenting those news stories, it goes, this happened to an organization very similarly shaped, or in the same industry, or delivering the same widgets that we do. And so when you put it to, this happened to somebody else very similarly, that definitely makes your security awareness stories a lot easier.
Awesome. So we did that check mark, and we submitted it, and we got a right option here, as AJ said. And if you click on it again, you can say it's easier for employees to relate to stories about incidents at similar organizations. I actually configured this one, statistics, to be something useful as well. I know you said, people can start to be desensitized to it, but I think it can be helpful just to sort of get people's attention to start with. Sometimes, maybe not continuously, but it does help people understand what the impact can be. And of course, explaining the definitions,
footnote, right?
Yeah. The explaining the definitions is not necessarily going to influence how people view the importance of good cyber hygiene. So those are things we don't really need at that point. We're still just trying to get their attention. And then we wrap up with a little summary about it, and look at that, we're done our challenge. So that took a minute or two, and just a demonstration of how we would sort of build this kind of awareness stuff right into the ClickArmor platform. That's my little plug for ClickArmor this time.
I think, Scott, to your point there, I think sometimes if you give them the story and then share the stat, or share a stat, then give them a story, it also puts association, because we know, at least as professionals, we hear about like what the Verizon data breach shares, that 82% of attacks have a human element. So hearing that the human is involved in 82%, and then you share the news article, and it gives them a stat, so a number they can remember, and then an association such as the article. So I can see the benefit of both, but like your point, don't just throw numbers, don't just throw definitions. You got to give an association. So how do you apply this? What is the application of the metric of the number I just gave you? So
excellent. So that sort of covers the content that we have time for today. But I do encourage people to put any comments into the chat, whether you liked what we covered, if there was anything that you wanted to follow up with, maybe suggest topics for next time. I'll have a look at the chat later on and we can really dig deeper. But before we wind up, just wanted to give you guys one last crack at commenting on that whole problem of what kind of awareness are we trying to get across to people? Fletus?
So I think the biggest thing is we talked about in the last poll, look for something unusual. Just start to find the unusual things in your job. I mean, if we're creatures of habit, so find ways to break that habitual habit of just clicking on everything or accepting and being. Does this, as I said before, am I used to seeing communications from a Gmail account? Probably not. My executive probably isn't emailing me directly. Unless I'm with that part of the org, I should be inquisitive anytime I hear those or see those messages. And to your point, be very cautious what you share on a phone call. They're trying to get information out of you. That's the reconnaissance from the phone piece of it, of is this a valid number and will this person divulge information about my company? It may seem innocent, even you just sharing first name, last name, or how your LAN ID is set up, your login account can give them a piece of data to now phish you technically. So just be careful what you divulge online, on the phone, and what you're replying to in your email.
Excellent. AJ?
Yeah, I'd say any awareness is good awareness, right? It's sort of which one's best at that point. There are certainly some that have better outcomes and will move your security program closer to where you need to go. So yeah, I feel like if you had to, you could pick anything and it would probably have some value in the security program. But finding what has the most return on an investment, certainly would be the pattern detection and recognition of anomalies, understanding the business processes and how some of these things work, and then being aware of the fact that yes, anything that involves kind of money and financial situations, maybe just simply remind people of the process. You are not authorized to hand out money on behalf of the company unless you work in these two places, kind of thing. And just, all of that awareness really lends into it. So yeah, understanding the desired outcomes of your program and then tailoring the message to the audience and just being aware that some of it's going to get understood, some of it won't. So it's a repetitive process. And just, keep at it with the pattern detection and recognition of anomalies.
Excellent. Great stuff. So that's it for this time. I put a note in the chat. If you want to sign up and get notified of our next session, probably we'll try to do these every couple of weeks. I'm looking at probably 2 weeks from yesterday, maybe for the next one. And I have a feeling we might do something like maybe assessments. How do we assess people on their knowledge? And so let's start thinking about questions we could ask. What would you like to know about assessing people's vulnerability? And we'll leave it at that. You can comment or join us on LinkedIn to chat about all that stuff, and hopefully see you next time. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.